Viewers, it's my pleasure to welcome Professor M D Nalapat once again to our hangout. Professor Nalapat, welcome to PGurus channel.
Thank you, Sri.
Professor Nalapat, a lot of things have been happening in the country of Afghanistan. Afghanistan was, after all, part of Akhand Bharat up until 1947, when the British left us. Everything was all one entity, and then things have started taking different directions. I just wanted to have your inputs on what is playing out in Afghanistan post the US Taliban accord. Is Taliban going to overrun Afghanistan? Is the US going to leave their Bagram base where they have invested a lot of money and resources? If that goes and falls in the hands of Taliban, what kind of ramifications that will be for the region? Why don't you share with us your thoughts on this?
Well, Sri, I'd like to say that so far as Afghanistan is concerned, unfortunately, it has been the victim of toxic policies for quite some time. On the one hand, it's been the victim of toxic policies by the Soviet Union, the former Soviet Union. They tried to basically promote a kind of ideology and government there, which the Afghan people would refuse to accept. I mean, if they had tried to do that in India, Indian people also would have rejected that policy. It's nothing to do with religion. It's to do with with the kind of control mechanisms that the Soviet state thought was natural, and frankly, which were fashioned under Lenin and Stalin. So the Soviet Union introduced a lot of toxic policies to Afghanistan. It compounded that by invading Afghanistan and to ensure that the government that it wanted to come to power would stay in power.
So one question, when did the shadow of Soviet Russia started falling over Afghanistan?
See, the fact is, Afghanistan, the Pashtun people have been a very moderate people. And you had two groups of Pashtuns, a small minority who were fundamentalists, who were even, let's say, Wahhabi, and an overwhelming majority who were moderate. Unfortunately, what happened was that in the 70s, the Soviet Union was looking at expanding everywhere, including and India was a very, very important state so far the Soviet Union is concerned. So therefore, Afghanistan was next door neighbor of India. Pakistan was no friend of the Soviet Union, quite the reverse. So from that point of view, they were interested in ensuring a quote-unquote a friendly pro-Soviet regime in Afghanistan. Now, they went a long way towards that, and finally, they decided to invade the country, and that, I think, was the beginning of the end for them in Afghanistan. Around the close of the 1970s, I think, the decision was taken to invade, and they were embroiled in that war for the whole of the 1980s. Okay? Now, once that happened, the Americans made a fatal error. The fatal error of the Russians was to impose their system, the Soviet system, and then to invade Afghanistan, which is a completely intolerable, and it basically, it created an image of the Soviet Union as just another colonial power, which was a very ugly image, frankly. What the Americans did was they had a choice. They could have turned to the moderate Pathans. Then the Tajiks, the Uzbeks, the Hazaras, the large Shia populations, all of them. And they would have all combined to fight the Russians. They were all patriotic Afghans. They hated the Russians. And but unfortunately, what the Americans did, they turned to Pakistan. Now, I don't know what is wrong with your country, Sri, that the establishment in your country has some kind of a blinding, blinding darkness, if I may say so, where it comes to Pakistan. So they outsourced the question of dealing with the Soviet invasion to Pakistan. Pakistan was very worried about Pashtun nationalism. Pakistan, frankly, a large part of the territory of Pakistan is composed of Pashtun territories, which are frankly in illegal occupation of the government in Islamabad. If you look at the Durand line, it's long since that particular line has lost its legal force. It should have been returned back to the Pashtun people. Pashtuns should have been given their freedom, but unfortunately they are still prisoners in Pakistan. So the reality is, for them, Pashtun nationalism is an enemy of the centralized state controlled by the Punjabi military in Pakistan. So they turned to the small extremist community in Afghanistan, and they nourished and nurtured this community with American money, assistance, money from the Middle East, assistance, etc., etc. And this community began increasing in size among the Pashtuns.
Well, viewers, if you want to know a little bit more about America's involvement and America's mistakes in this, watch a movie called Charlie Wilson's War. It's a very good movie. I think it was Tom Hanks who acted as Charlie Wilson. I'm not 100% sure about that, but I'm sure of the title. It gives you an excellent perspective of why or what the mistakes the Americans did. It was very, very regrettable what they did. But sir, please continue. So let's come to the present status now. So what happened when, I'm sorry. So 9/11 happened, right? And then there was the Talibans were driven out. The Americans did a good job there. Unlike in Iraq, they drove out the Taliban, and those guys went and settled in perhaps some portions of Pakistan, right?
Well, look, Sri, this is where the question of means and ends comes in. If you use a method that essentially will come and recoil on you, then that method, frankly, the end you may reach, but then a far worse situation may come. So the cure may be worse than the disease, so to speak. And that's
Right.
what has happened to the world after America started strengthening the fanatics in the Pashtun community and fanatics from the Middle East. And it kind of, bred fanaticism. Some universities in the United States, I'm not, if you can check their names, some of them are pretty small universities. They started developing curricula to train fanatics from the age of school children onwards. Train them, in a sense, to be terrorists and suicide bombers as school kids. Hatred of the other, hatred of almost anybody who was not ultra Wahhabi. So unfortunately, what happened was that, let me be frank, of course, the good thing about your country, they're never shy about taking credit, the policymakers. Whenever they do something, even if it's a horrible mistake, and then somebody somehow, snatches a victory from the jaws of defeat, and then immediately they claim responsibility for the mistake. So as soon as the Taliban were driven out, you had a whole lot of people writing articles, books, television appearances, how the Americans have all along been helping what we call the Northern Alliance, and how the Americans were always opposed to Taliban. I'm sorry, Sri, historical truth demands that we say the godfather of the Taliban was Bill Clinton. And, the fairy godmother whom he sent was a lady called Robin Raphael. And I'm sorry to say, George Bush also, I'm told, welcomed one or two Taliban delegations to Washington, even after we were sworn in, on the eve of 9/11. So let me only say that when the Americans, they get attached to somebody, it takes a long time for them to wake up. So this is what happened. So then the Northern Alliance came along, and then the Americans after 9/11 realized that they'd made a mistake. Okay, then you could have rectified that mistake, because Atal Bihari Vajpayee came forward, Jaswant Singh came forward, L.K. Advani came forward, George Fernandez came forward. All four of them came forward and told, George Bush that, look, we are ready to fight with you because fanaticism is a threat to us. And lo and behold, what did the Americans do? They turned once again to Pakistan. The same Pakistan that had nourished the Taliban, that had built up these terror groups. George Bush and Dick Cheney again turned to them. Now, how this happened, why this happened, I don't know. But India's offer was rejected. And I would like to remind you, in the 1990s, Bill Clinton treated India shamefully, shamelessly. He put such enormous pressure on India. He sent so many diplomats to India, so many so-called experts to India. And so many Indians went there and, basically came back saying, oh, we should leave Kashmir. We should not have the nuclear weapon. We should not have the bomb. we should just be satisfied to be a very minor league player all for eternity. But the point is exactly that the Northern Alliance, thanks fortunately to very resolute American Air Force action, American Special Forces help, and superb American weapon systems and interception systems, the Northern Alliance was able to completely finish off the Taliban. Okay, then what happened? Of course, the Northern Alliance then was forgotten. The Uzbeks, Tajiks, Hazaras were completely forgotten. And the Americans, who were frankly, again, probably charmed by Pervez Musharraf. I'm sorry to say, Musharraf charmed quite a few of India's leaders also. So, I mean, the way Bhutto charmed leaders, Musharraf also charmed leaders. There's something about Pakistani leaders that, Indian politicians and officials seem to be charmed by. I don't know what it is, but it's there. But what happened? That the NATO, not only the Americans, I mean, you'll be glad to know you have company, the British, the French, the Germans, all of them combined. And that, yes, now these wretched Tajiks and Hazaras and all that, forget about them. We have to again win back the Pashtuns. So how do we win them back? We win them back by basically helping the Pashtun warlords to do well. And so who selects the warlords for the Americans and the Europeans to help?
Pakistanis.
So whom does he select? I mean, I used to, cry myself hoarse. I've done some writing on the subject when I used to go to Washington, for example. But I mean, you can pretend, you can bring a sleeping man, awake. A man who pretends to be asleep cannot be awake. So I don't know what is the reason, but the reality is, it is the Americans and American money under George W. Bush that basically funded the Taliban and made the Taliban the horrible force it subsequently became. So I think the Taliban, frankly, should keep a good, big golden statue of Clinton and another silver statue of George W. Bush, wherever they've got whichever backwoods they've got their operational headquarters. So then what happened? The Tajiks, Hazaras, everybody was brought aside. Well, we have seen that happen now with the Kurds, frankly. The Kurds who helped you, brushed aside. And I mean, the same thing is happening. So obviously history is repeating itself. But that is what recreated this particular monster. That plus the fact that Cheney and Bush refused to use American assets against the Taliban. The same way as George H.W. Bush refused to use American assets against Saddam Hussein and use those assets inside Iraq. Frankly, that only multiplied the future problems for the United States. I think that was a cowardly decision, and George H.W. Bush paid for it. The American people walked away from him, and they went to Bill Clinton, who was good in domestic policy, but in foreign policy, pretty awful. So then, what happens? So there you have this situation. And today, the Taliban are today recreated by Pakistan. And now, once again, you have the Trump administration turning again to Pakistan. Now, why this is happening, again, I do not know. And Pakistan promoting the Taliban as the means to peace, reconciliation in Afghanistan.
I have one scenario. See, 2015, Modi comes to power. Obama is still the president of the United States. And Obama asks Modi for boots on the ground in Afghanistan. Modi says yes when he is meeting there. And then he comes to India and he changes his mind. And nothing happens, no boots on the ground. And the Iran deal also was signed by the US. So a case could have been made that if India had put boots on the ground, India could have had access by land to Afghanistan from Chabahar. India would have been able to lay that infrastructure, and it would have been much, much more harder for Trump to welch on the sovereign deal that the United States signed with Iran. It would have been much, much more difficult because India would have been front and center in the middle of these things. Don't you think that there was perhaps a misstep there on part of India?
Well, I'd like to say that I'd like to see a comprehensive security and defense arrangement with the United States and with India. and this defense arrangement, in my view, cannot preclude boots on the ground. Now, I find in India, the day you talk about boots on the ground, I mean, people, they just clam up. They just don't want it. And they keep talking about the IPKF in Sri Lanka. The IPKF in Sri Lanka was a very extraordinary case. What happened was not the IPKF's fault. You had President Premadasa, Ranasinghe Premadasa, a Sinhala president, who basically gave a tremendous amount of money and arms to the LTTE. He sent officers of the Sri Lankan military to train the LTTE against the IPKF. The LTTE was functioning significantly on the resources provided by Premadasa. Now, I'm very certain the agencies in India would have got to know of it. Why no government confronted Premadasa and said, look here, Premadasa, what you're doing is unacceptable. And if you do that, I'm afraid we'll have to treat you also as a hostile force. Sorry, yes, go ahead, Sri.
Nalapat, at that time, Junius Jayawardena was the president, and the president in the Sri Lankan system overrules prime minister, not like the benign presidency of India, but the president is the ultimate authority in Sri Lanka, isn't it? So could Premadasa have done what he did without the knowledge of Jayawardena?
May I say that Premadasa then became president? And that is when the problem really started.
Okay.
And when he became president, that is when he started doing this mischief. So frankly, one reason why the LTT has been kept going for so long until it was finally overthrown during the time of Mahinda Rajapaksa was because of the mistake that Premadasa made. But the reality is the IPKF was stabbed in the back by the very Sri Lankan government that asked the IPKF to come. I mean, Premadasa was the successor to Jayawardena, who had asked Rajiv Gandhi, please come and help us. So, number one. And number two, which is again absolutely, unbelievable. I mean, you had, I think, if I'm not mistaken, VP Singh was the Prime Minister at that time.
Yes.
He was in a daring hurry to get the IPKF back to India.
Right.
Because Premadasa told him, you have to get it back. And VP Singh could have said, sorry, we have not completed the task and you're creating problems in that task. No, nothing like that happened. The VP Singh IPKF came back to India. They landed in Chennai. They could have landed in Bangalore. They could have landed in Hyderabad. In Chennai, you had a large number of people, today fortunately much fewer in number, who were entirely pro-LTT. And they organized a very unpleasant reception for our heroes in uniform. So frankly, Sri, these are the lessons of Sri Lanka. Instead of which, what has happened is our establishment has got paralyzed by fear and doubt. So that, even I don't know if they themselves, when they go to these territories, whether they wear boots, I think they probably only wear shoes or slippers. They won't dare to wear boots because they're so allergic to Indian boots on the ground in any location. So the reality is, IPKF, the wrong lessons have been drawn from the IPKF withdrawal from Sri Lanka. The IPKF was not defeated. And frankly, what was done to the IPKF in Sri Lanka, what was done to the IPKF when it returned to India, is completely, in my view, a travesty of justice, a travesty of what a country is expected to do. So let me point that out. So that is basically at the root. Anytime, in fact, we were asked to send a division to Kurdistan in 2003. We could have been a major player if we had done that. I think, L.K. Advani was in favor, and Mr. Vajpayee was convinced by Rajesh Mishra, the same syndrome. No boots on the ground, sir. Chappals, yes, but no boots. So it was not sent. Then, in 2014, I had the idea, which I wrote articles about and communicated in various ways to various people, that why doesn't India send 2 squadrons, one to Syria, one to Iraq? One functions in tandem with Bashar Assad, certainly not a US friend. After all, we are not going to just blindly follow the US foreign policy. And one in tandem with the Iraqi government. And these 2 squadrons operate against the growing threat of extremist terror, which became the ISIS scourge later on. You remember ISIS became a very powerful force. And at that point in time, it was, it was a pretty difficult thing. So, and then some special forces. Special forces were not sent, squadrons were not sent. This was after Prime Minister Modi came to power. I would never have given this kind of advice. If Manmohan Singh had been Prime Minister, poor man would have, fainted in shock. But even after that, nothing was done. Lo and behold, what happens? Vladimir Putin. I'm not saying that he read any article of mine or anything. They were not written in Russian. But Vladimir Putin sends exactly 2 squadrons to Syria. Exactly 2 squadrons. About 5,000 or 6,000 Spetsnaz special forces. And today, Russia has become a superpower in the Middle East on the strength of those 2 squadrons and Spetsnaz forces. I can tell you, Sri, we would have been a Middle Eastern superpower if we had done that. And I can tell you, I know the Arabs very well. In Kerala and the Arab world have had extensive and friendly contacts over thousands of years. They respect a friend. They respect a friend who's strong. And I can tell you, if we were helping them against extremism, they would treat the Indian people there with far more respect and not less respect. So I just want to make that point about boots on the ground. IPKF, don't repeat. Are we going to say that there are going to be clones of Premadasa everywhere? There are going to be clones of VP Singh all the time? Are we thinking that? Because our troops are brave, they're bold, they're determined. And they are among the best fighters in the world. You arm them, you equip them, and you give them backing. And you give their families backing, they will perform miracles. As they did in the First War, Second War, and even in certain sectors in 1962 against China, when very bad generalship, very bad leadership, and starving the army of essential equipment. Despite that, they put on a very good show against the Chinese. We should have used the Air Force. I don't know. We didn't use the Air Force.
Well, couple of things that I wanted to add to what you said. Premadasa was finally consumed by the very organization that he was propping up. He was also assassinated. So this doesn't end well, because once the IPKF was out of the picture, Sri Lanka, he became a sitting target. The man didn't realize what he was doing. And that went away. And the other point I wanted to add to you said a very good observation, your very important observation. After the end of the First World War, those of you who have seen what's that Lawrence of Arabia movie, you will get some perspective of this. That there was a kingdom that was created, it's called Iraq, IRAK, not Q. And in that, the peacekeeping force was actually of Indian origin and Indian descent. And they apparently did a fine job between 1918 and I think, if my memory serves me right, up until 1928 or something like that. And they knew exactly how the different tribes used to exist. They knew how to keep everybody friendly, to keep the peace there, and things were in very, very good shape. We have to not just look at the IPKF experience, but also look at what went right for India, where Indian forces, in fact, they formed the bulk of the British Army, whether it was the First World War or the Second World War. They always took the command from an Englishman, and there were no commanders of Indian origin. There were, until maybe late 40s, when we had some excellent Kariyappas and so on and so forth, Manek Shahs and so forth. So the point in saying all these things is that there was a lot of good that the Indian army, boots on the ground, accomplished. Why don't we also look at that?
I agree with you, and I would like to say, Sri, we have got 65% of India is below the age of 35. I do believe, frankly, that we have to, inculcate a kind of, say, whether it is National Cadet Corps, whether it is, paramilitary training or military training, we have to give this kind of training to millions of our young people. And essentially, frankly, we may have to undertake some responsibilities in a manner which does not strain our economy, but in fact helps the economy, and in a manner which does justice to the fighting men and women that we are so proud about and proud of. the India cannot shy away from that responsibility, because India has got technically the highest pool of this kind of, of this tremendous material, military material in the world. And we need to use these young people. Otherwise, what is going to happen? You're seeing in the United States, for example, young people on the streets because they feel they don't have a job or anything. They don't have an objective. Our young people should have a sense of pride. They should have an objective, and they should be given a sense of mission. And one way of doing that is to ensure that India does not behave like a small little power, but has the confidence to act like a future superpower.
Absolutely, and I couldn't agree with you more on NCC, National Cadet Corps. I was part of that for about 2 or 3 years. In fact, I was there as an engineering student, and I learned a lot of things. I went to their camps. I learned about handling. I could fire a 303 rifle. That was a workhorse of the Second World War. I also learned to fire .38 Smith & Wesson. The things that we read while we are growing up, James Hadley Chase and, Alistair MacLean and so on and so forth. Not only that, they also taught a lot of stuff about aeronautical engineering. And that's when I learned that you only need 7 degrees to lift off from the ground. And all yaw, pitch, everything. It was a fantastic experience. You didn't have to take a grade on that. You just went and you understood a lot of things, what it means to be a part of the army. I mean, it was a fantastic experience. That's all I can say. So I wholeheartedly welcome that. In fact, I would say make it sort of like mandatory, like the way they have in Israel, because at the young age, in high school level, the kids need to learn discipline. What is it to be disciplined? Why do you need to know? How else will you inculcate the sense that you belong to this country?
No, Sri, I'm against mandatory, anything that's mandatory, but it's not just, those who are, talking about Gandhian nonviolence, they may have other fields, but, you had the Peace Corps in America. We can have a Peace Corps in India. We can have a Health Corps in India, where you train youngsters to be health volunteers. That is happening but it is a limited way. We have got hundreds of millions of young people. You have to give them a sense of mission. You have to give them a strong motivation that they are important for the country. And as John F. Kennedy said, ask what you can do for your country and not just what your country can do for you. So I am very much in favor of that, but that has to be matched by a similar kind, if I may say so, of profile on the international stage. And that is where a good America-India alliance comes in. And that is where, Sri, frankly, Afghanistan, I personally feel there is no way the Taliban is ever going to control Afghanistan again. The Afghan people have understood what the Taliban is. They hate the Taliban. I don't think even 15% of Afghan people will accept the Taliban. 85%, including the bulk of Pashtuns, will revolt. And when they revolt, I hope countries will be there to help them against this monstrous beast, which I'm sorry to say, the Trump administration, I don't know what has happened to Donald Trump. This is a man who was talking about fighting Wahhabism, and now he's embracing Erdogan, who is coming as the high priest of this particular group. So I don't know what's happening to President Trump, but I would only like to say, Afghanistan, I can tell you, if the United States inserts the Taliban into Kabul, there will be another civil war. And in that civil war, I certainly hope India will take sides, and I certainly hope the United States will take sides. I am heartened by the fact that in the United States, the bulk of the American people are decent, self-respecting people. Of whichever community they belong to, they want a world in which fundamentalism, religious extremism, racial and religious intolerance is eliminated. So I am quite confident that after some time, Trump will not be able to have his way. What is really worrying to me is the way that Mitch McConnell, is holding back Senator Graham and Senator Van Hollen from getting passed in the Senate their legislation on sanctions to Turkey. What is Mitch McConnell, obligation to Erdogan? He has got strong support, I can tell you, from Ilhan Omar. And Ilhan Omar and Mitch McConnell are today, the same ideological stable where Erdogan is concerned. The sooner that legislation gets passed, the better, in my opinion.
You're absolutely right. Mitch McConnell is a man of mystery. He's somehow managed to, sing paeans of praise to Trump. If it was somebody more, acting like a head of a Senate, things would have been a lot different, because we have way too, shifts in, approach. I mean, one day Iran, we go and sign a deal, and then the next president comes along and belches on a sovereign deal. I just can't understand this, because when a country to country deal gets turned upon, then where is the reference? So there are lots of problems here now. Americans are faced with a difficult choice in 2020. I'm hoping that they will see their way clear through some of the problems that are cropping up now, and we'll see how that goes. But you wanted to add something. Go ahead.
No, I just want to say that if Joe Biden chooses somebody not in the Clinton stable, like Senator Kamala Harris or Senator Elizabeth Warren as his running mate, then I think he's got a good chance. But if he chooses somebody who's who's another camp follower of the Clintons, I think Donald Trump will make toast out of Joe Biden. So Donald Trump is a formidable politician. I really wish he will come back to what he was been saying for about 30 years, fighting Wahhabism. I mean, in about a year, he has completely walked away from all that he's been saying for 30 years on so many issues, including on Pakistan, including on Afghanistan, and including on the Taliban.
Yes, indeed, and it's very, very interesting. We have there are about 10 people being talked about as a possible vice presidential candidates for Joe Biden, and all the people that you mentioned are in that list. There is one person that is not in that list, who might be a surprise candidate. We will reveal that in our future conversations. Thank you very much, Professor Nalapat, and let's hope that the United States continues to have a presence in Afghanistan. They just cannot pull their roots and move away from Bagram. They've invested a lot in there, lots of tanks and stuff that cannot be moved out now. I don't know. We never did touch upon that. What is your thought on that?
Look, the Taliban have made it very clear every single American soldier should leave, period. And in Bagram also, that includes Bagram, that includes every part of Afghanistan. Maybe Mr. Khalilzad didn't read the fine print, but it's not even fine print. And he hasn't read the various, whether it's social media, whether it is writings, whether it is the speeches of the various Taliban leaders. If he had done that, he will understand the Taliban is determined to get full control of Afghanistan, full control to basically control the women of Afghanistan, control the children of Afghanistan, and finish off, liquidate anybody who is not Wahhabi, and introduce a very harsh system of law once again, and create a system, frankly, which belongs to the Middle Ages. They did that, but I can only say the Afghan people will fight back. And when they fight back, I hope that the world will not only just stand by the sidelines, but will help them to preserve the Afghan way of life.
Well, let's hope so. Thank you very much, Professor Nalapat. And we'll be back with more such interesting conversations about the geopolitics of the world. Thank you.